Montana Territory, 1870. The late summer dust hung heavy over Cottonwood Creek as the funeral procession wound its way up the hillside. Lilah Morgan stood alone, her slender frame wrapped in a simple black dress that caught the hot breeze, a matching veil shielding her tear-stained cheeks from the prying eyes of townsfolk. At 24, she never imagined she'd be burying her husband after only 3 years of marriage. The pine box containing what remained of Edward Morgan descended into the dusty earth, taking with it her dreams of the life they'd planned to build. "The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away," intoned Reverend Palmer, his words carried away on the wind that swept across the Montana plains. Lilah barely heard them. Her golden blonde hair, partially hidden beneath her mourning bonnet, caught the sunlight as she stared at the grave. She'd come west as a bride, full of hope and ambition. Now she stood alone on this desolate hillside, a widow with nothing but a struggling ranch and debts that seemed to multiply like weeds after spring rain. "Mrs. Morgan," Mayor Stillwell approached after the other mourners had begun their descent toward town. "My deepest condolences, if there's anything the town can do." "Thank you, Mayor," Lilah interrupted, her voice steady despite the emptiness settling in her chest. She didn't want their pity. "I'll manage." The truth gnawed at her like a wolf at weakened prey. The Morgan ranch was failing. Edward had borrowed heavily to expand, only to watch disease claim half their cattle last winter. The drought this summer had finished what the illness began. She had perhaps 2 months before the bank would come calling. As the last of the funeral party disappeared down the hill, Lilah remained, watching the gravediggers finish their work. She had always believed love would sustain her through the hardships of frontier life. But love had died alongside Edward, leaving her with the cruel lesson that on the frontier, sentimentality was a luxury nobody could afford. Survival was what mattered now. "A woman alone can't make it in this country," Edward's brother had told her just that morning. "Best sell now, come back east with us." But the ranch was all she had left. If she lost that too, what would remain of the life she'd chosen? The sun was beginning its western descent when Lilah finally turned away from the fresh grave. The path back to her empty home stretched before her like the uncertain future itself. "I'll survive," she whispered to the wind, "whatever it takes." Owen Xavier spotted the cattle before he saw the ranch house. A small herd, poorly managed by the looks of it, with fence posts leaning at precarious angles and a water trough nearly run dry. At 26, Owen had worked enough cattle operations to recognize one in trouble. He adjusted his tan Stetson, wiping trail dust from his brow. 3 weeks of riding had left him with little more than the clothes on his back, his saddle, and his sorrel gelding. The wanted posters back in Wyoming wouldn't follow him this far, he hoped, not for a crime he hadn't committed. The ranch house came into view, modest but sturdy, with a sagging porch and smoke curling from the chimney despite the summer heat. A cooking fire, most likely. His stomach growled in response. Owen had no intention of stopping long, just maybe trade some labor for a meal, gather information about who might be hiring, then move on before questions arose about his past. He'd learned the hard way that trust was a commodity too expensive for a man in his position. As he approached, he saw a slender figure struggling with a post-hole digger, attempting to repair a section of fallen fence. The woman, he could tell by the way her dress clung to her frame despite the men's work gloves and wide-brimmed hat, was fighting a losing battle with the rocky soil. "Afternoon, ma'am," Owen called out, keeping a respectful distance as he drew his horse to a halt. The woman straightened, one hand going immediately to the waist of her faded work dress. Owen didn't miss the implication. She was armed and ready. "State your business," she said, pushing back her hat to reveal a face that momentarily stole his breath. Despite smudges of dirt and perspiration dampening tendrils of golden hair at her temples, she possessed a beauty that seemed out of place on this hardscrabble ranch. Her eyes, blue as a Montana sky, assessed him with equal parts wariness and exhaustion. She couldn't be much past 25, yet something in those eyes spoke of burdens far beyond her years. Owen removed his hat in a gesture of respect. "Name's Owen Xavier, ma'am, just passing through looking for work. Thought maybe you could use an extra hand with that fence before I move on." "I can't pay you," she said bluntly. "Wasn't asking for payment, maybe just a meal before I ride on." He gestured toward the fence. That post won't hold if you set it there, ground's too rocky. A flash of indignation crossed her face before practicality seemed to win out. She sighed, pushing a strand of hair from her face with the back of her gloved hand. Lilah Morgan, was my husband's ranch. She paused, studying him with those penetrating blue eyes. You know cattle. Yes, ma'am. Worked ranches from Texas to Wyoming. And what brings you to Montana territory? The question carried suspicion. Owen shrugged, keeping his expression neutral. Work dries up, man moves on. That's the way of things out here. She seemed to consider this, then nodded toward the post-hole digger. Show me where this post should go, then. If you're right, you've earned supper. Owen dismounted, tethering his horse to a nearby tree. He removed his jacket despite the cooling afternoon air, revealing a lean but muscular frame shaped by years of hard labor. As he took the tool from her, their fingers brushed momentarily. He pretended not to notice the way she quickly withdrew her hand. You're trying to mend the fence line here, Owen observed, walking a few paces to the left. But the drainage from that rise will undermine anything you place in this soil. You want to set your corner post over here, on solid ground. He drove the digger into the earth with practiced efficiency, his movements economical and assured. Lilah watched, arms crossed. You've done this before. Many times. And you're just passing through? Her tone made it a question weighted with doubt. Owen paused, leaning on the handle of the digger. That's right, Mrs. Morgan. Just passing through. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue, but he'd learned that the truth was a luxury for men with clean pasts. And his past, deserved or not, had a price on it that made honesty dangerous for him and anyone who might help him. Well, Mr. Xavier, if you can get that corner post set properly before dark, I'll feed you a proper supper. After that, we'll see. Owen nodded, returning to his work as she walked back toward the house. He watched her go, noting the straight line of her shoulders despite what must be crushing circumstances. A woman alone on a failing ranch in Montana territory faced odds that would break most men. Something about her determination stirred an unfamiliar feeling in him, respect certainly, but something else too. Something he didn't dare name because names had power, and he'd surrendered enough power already to last a lifetime. By nightfall, Owen had not only set the corner post but repaired the entire section of fence. His shirt clung to his back with sweat despite the cooling evening air, and his hands bore fresh blisters. But the work felt good, honest labor that produced tangible results. The smell of cooking drew him to the back door of the ranch house. He hesitated, then knocked politely. It's open, called Lilah's voice from within. The kitchen was warm and surprisingly welcoming. A pot of stew bubbled on the cast-iron stove, and fresh biscuits cooled on a wooden board. Owen removed his hat, suddenly conscious of his trail-worn appearance. You did good work out there, Lilah said, her back to him as she stirred the pot. Better than I expected. Thank you, ma'am. Sit down, Mr. Xavier, and it's Mrs. Morgan, not ma'am, makes me feel ancient. Owen suppressed a smile, taking a seat at the simple wooden table. Yes, Mrs. Morgan. She turned, and he saw she'd changed into a clean dress, still practical, but the deep blue fabric brought out the color of her eyes. Her hair was pinned up, revealing the graceful line of her neck. When did you lose your husband? Owen asked as she set a bowl before him. Surprise flickered across her face at his directness. 2 weeks ago. Thrown from a horse that should have known better. Her voice held no tears, just a weary acceptance. Edward and that stallion had a battle of wills going on for months. The horse finally won. I'm sorry for your loss. She nodded, sitting across from him with her own bowl. Eat your supper, Mr. Xavier, you've earned it. The stew was simple but hearty, beef, potatoes, carrots, and onions seasoned with salt and pepper. Owen hadn't realized how hungry he was until the first spoonful hit his tongue. He forced himself to eat slowly, savoring each bite. Your fence work tells me you know ranching, Lilah said after a few minutes of silence. What else can you do? Owen considered his answer carefully. I can break horses, Dr. Cattle, repair most anything that breaks on a ranch. I'm handy with a branding iron and know how to manage a herd through winter. Can you shoot? The question caught him off guard. Yes. Straight. Straight enough. She nodded, her expression unreadable. I have a proposition for you, Mr. Xavier. I need help getting this ranch back in order. My husband left debts and the bank's patience will run out with the first snow. If I can get the remaining cattle healthy and the place functioning, I might convince them to extend the loan. Owen set down his spoon. And where do I fit in? I can't pay wages, but I can offer room and board, plus a small percentage of whatever we manage to sell at fall roundup, if we get that far. Why would you trust a stranger with such an arrangement? Her eyes met his directly. I don't, but I'm desperate and you seem to know your business. Besides, she added with a ghost of a smile, I sleep with a loaded shotgun and I'm a light sleeper. Owen found himself smiling back despite himself. Fair enough. So, do we have an agreement? Every instinct warned against staying in one place too long. The longer he remained, the greater the chance someone would recognize him from those wanted posters. And yet something about Lilah Morgan's desperate determination struck a chord in him. Until fall roundup, he agreed, but I should warn you, Mrs. Morgan, I may need to leave suddenly if circumstances require it. Running from something, Mr. Xavier. Aren't we all in one way or another? Their eyes held for a long moment before she nodded. The bunkhouse is empty. There's a washroom out back if you want to clean up. We start at dawn. As Owen crossed the yard to the bunkhouse later that evening, he gazed up at the vast Montana sky, stars piercing the darkness like distant campfires. For the first time in months, he felt something akin to peace. It wouldn't last, he knew. Nothing good ever did for men like him. But maybe, just maybe, he could do some good here before his past caught up with him again. The next 2 weeks established a rhythm that surprised them both with its ease. Owen rose before dawn, had coffee brewing by the time Lilah emerged from the main house, and they would discuss the day's tasks over a simple breakfast. The ranch needed everything: fence repairs, a barn roof that leaked, cattle suffering from neglect, and a well pump that functioned only when it chose to. Owen tackled each problem methodically, his skilled hands breathing life back into the failing operation. Lilah worked alongside him whenever possible, her determination never flagging despite the blisters on her hands and the exhaustion that sometimes dimmed her eyes. She never complained, never asked for special treatment because she was a woman, and never shirked even the dirtiest tasks. "You don't work like any Eastern woman I've ever met," Owen commented one evening as they repaired tack in the barn, the smell of leather and saddle soap filling the air. "I'm not Eastern anymore," Lilah replied, her fingers deftly working a leather punch through a strap. "When I married Edward and came west, I knew what I was choosing." "And do you regret it, coming west?" She paused, considering. "No, despite everything. No, there's a freedom here you can't find back east. Space to breathe, to become whoever you choose to be. Even if that person is a widow struggling to save a failing ranch." A flash of something, pain, determination, or perhaps both, crossed her face. Even then. "At least here the struggle is honest. Back east, it's all hidden behind manners and money and family connections. Here, it's just you against the elements, against the land." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "You understand that, don't you?" Owen nodded slowly. "Yes, I do." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of leather and the occasional nicker from the horses in their stalls. "You're good with your hands," Lilah observed, watching as Owen fashioned a new cinch strap with practiced ease. "Had to learn young. My pa died when I was 12, left me and my ma to run our place in Texas." He rarely spoke of his past, but something about the quiet intimacy of the barn loosened his tongue. "She remarried 2 years later. My stepfather had different ideas about ranching. We didn't see eye to eye. So you left." "So I left, been working other men's cattle ever since." Lilah nodded, seeming to understand all he wasn't saying. "Until now." Their eyes met across the workbench, and Owen felt something shift between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits set adrift by circumstance rather than choice. "Until now," he agreed softly. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spider silk and just as binding. Owen was the first to look away, uncomfortable with the unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. "We should turn in," he said, more gruffly than intended. "Early start tomorrow." Lilah nodded, gathering the repaired tack. "Good night, Mr. Xavier." Owen, he said suddenly, my name is Owen. A small smile touched her lips. Good night, Owens. As she walked back to the main house, her silhouette outlined against the twilight sky, Owen felt a warning prickle at the back of his neck. He was getting too comfortable here, letting down guards that had kept him alive these past months. The smart play would be to saddle up and ride out tonight, find another anonymous ranch farther north, keep moving until Wyoming and its false accusations were nothing but a bad memory. Instead, he found himself walking to the bunkhouse, to the narrow bed that had begun to feel like his own, in a place that was starting to feel dangerously like home. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by Jimmy Prescott, the 12-year-old son of the general store owner in Cottonwood Creek. Pa said to bring this right out to you, Mrs. Morgan, the boy said, handing Lilah an envelope bearing the bank's seal, said it looked important. Owen, who was replacing rotten boards on the porch steps, saw Lilah's face pale as she took the envelope. Thank you, Jimmy. Tell your father I'm grateful. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a penny. For your trouble. The boy grinned, pocketing the coin before hopping back on his pony and racing back toward town. Lilah stood motionless on the porch, staring at the unopened letter as if it might bite. Bad news doesn't improve with waiting, Owen said quietly, setting down his hammer. She glanced at him, then broke the seal with a decisive motion. Her eyes moved rapidly over the text, her expression growing more troubled with each line. The bank is sending an agent next week to assess the property's value, she said finally, her voice flat. They're calling the loan. Owen straightened, wiping sawdust from his hands. I thought we had until first snow. Apparently, Mr. Garrett decided the current cattle prices make it more advantageous to foreclose now rather than wait. Bitterness tinged her words. There's a cattle buyer coming with him. They intend to liquidate everything. They can't do that without your agreement, can they? Lilah laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. They can do whatever they want, Owen. That's what those papers Edward signed mean. The bank owns everything but the clothes on my back if they choose to take it. Anger surged through Owen, not at Lilah or even her late husband, but at the casual cruelty of men who could destroy a person's life with the stroke of a pen. There must be something we can do. Unless you have $500 hidden in your saddlebags, I don't see what. She folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her pocket. I always knew this was coming. I just thought I'd have more time. Owen watched helplessly as she squared her shoulders and walked back into the house, closing the door quietly behind her. He remained on the porch steps, his mind racing through options, each more impossible than the last. $500 might as well have been $5,000 for all the chance he had of producing it. His own funds consisted of exactly $12.37, enough for supplies to get him to the next job, not enough to save a ranch. That evening, supper was a silent affair. Lilah moved through the motions of serving food and cleaning up afterward like a sleepwalker, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. What will you do? Owen finally asked as she poured coffee. If the worst happens. Lilah sat across from him, cradling her cup between her palms as if drawing strength from its warmth. My parents are gone. I have a sister in St. Louis who would take me in, I suppose. She stared into the dark liquid. I'd have to sell everything that's mine outright, furniture, personal items, enough for train fare east. And start over. Yes, she looked up, meeting his eyes directly. But it wouldn't be my life anymore, Owen. It would be existing in someone else's world, living by their rules. I'd rather, she trailed off, shaking her head. Rather what? Nothing. It doesn't matter. She took a sip of coffee, then set the cup down with deliberate care. I should thank you for all you've done these past weeks. The ranch looks better than it has in years. Not good enough, apparently. That's not your fault. Her hand moved as if to touch his, then withdrew. You've been a godsend, truly. I don't know how I would have managed alone. The genuine gratitude in her voice made something twist painfully in Owen's chest. In the weeks since his arrival, he'd witnessed Lilah Morgan's quiet strength, her stubborn refusal to surrender to circumstances that would have broken lesser souls. He'd seen her work from dawn until dusk, hands bleeding from rope burns, never complaining, never yielding to exhaustion or despair. And now this, a banker's letter dismantling her world with cold efficiency. I'll ride into town tomorrow, Owen said suddenly. Maybe there's something we're missing, some way to extend the deadline at least. Lilah shook her head. Garrett's made up his mind, the letter made that clear. Still, there might be options we haven't considered. I won't sit by and watch them take everything you've worked for without at least trying. A faint smile touched her lips. Why do you care so much, Owen Xavier? This isn't your fight. The question caught him off guard. Why did he care? When had this woman's struggle become his own? The smart play would be to thank her for the hospitality and move on before the bank men arrived. Before his own troubles caught up with him. Before he admitted to himself what he already knew, that somewhere between mending fences and shared meals, Lilah Morgan had become more than just an employer. Maybe I'm tired of watching good people lose to men who make their fortunes from behind desks, he said finally. Or maybe I just believe you deserve better than what life's handed you. Something shifted in her eyes, a softening, a recognition that mirrored his own unspoken feelings. For a moment the distance between them seemed both vast and non-existent. Thank you, she said softly, for caring enough to try. Cottonwood Creek consisted of a single dusty street lined with false-fronted buildings, a general store, saloon, livery stable, small hotel, and at the far end, the imposing brick structure that housed the Montana Territorial Bank and Trust. Owen tied his horse outside the bank, adjusting his hat and brushing dust from his clothes before entering. The interior was cool and quiet, the ticking of a large wall clock the only sound disturbing the stillness. A balding man looked up from a ledger, his spectacles catching the light. May I help you? I'm here about the Morgan Ranch, Owen said, approaching the high counter. I'd like to speak with Mr. Garrett. The clerk's expression turned immediately guarded. Mr. Garrett is quite busy, perhaps I can assist you. I doubt it unless you have the authority to renegotiate loan terms. Before the clerk could respond, a door at the rear of the bank opened and a tall, well-dressed man emerged. His tailored suit and gold watch chain marked him as someone of means, while the calculating assessment in his eyes identified him as surely as a nameplate. I'm Garrett, he said, approaching, and you are? Owen Xavier, I work for Mrs. Morgan. Understanding and dismissal flashed across Garrett's face, Mrs. Morgan's ranch hand. I'm afraid matters of finance are not typically discussed with employees, Mr. Xavier. Owen kept his expression neutral despite the insult. Mrs. Morgan asked me to inquire about extending the deadline on her loan. The cattle are improving, and with a few more weeks. The decision has been made, Garrett interrupted, his tone suggesting the matter was beneath further discussion. The Morgan property has been operating at a loss for over a year. The drought has depleted the grazing land and cattle prices are dropping. It's simply no longer a viable investment for this institution. So you're willing to ruin a widow rather than show a little patience. Garrett's eyebrows rose at Owen's directness. Business is business, Mr. Xavier. Mrs. Morgan's personal circumstances, while regrettable, cannot influence sound financial decisions. The property will be assessed next week and the remaining livestock sold to offset the debt. And Mrs. Morgan, what happens to her? That is hardly my concern. Garrett straightened his already immaculate cuffs. Though I understand her late husband had family back east, perhaps they might offer assistance. The casual cruelty of the dismissal made Owen's hands clench at his sides. Is there no way to arrange an extension? Even a month would give her time to. Unless Mrs. Morgan can produce $500 by next Friday, there is nothing to discuss. Garrett's tone made it clear the conversation was over. Good day, Mr. Xavier. Owen stood his ground. And if the money were available? Something flickered in Garrett's eyes, annoyance perhaps, or surprise that a mere ranch hand would persist. If, by some miracle, Mrs. Morgan were able to pay the $500, the bank would be obligated to honor the original terms of the loan. But we both know that's impossible. Thank you for your time, Owen said stiffly, turning to leave. Outside, the bright Montana sunshine felt at odds with the cold weight settling in his chest. $500, an impossible sum for a ranch hand or a widow with a failing property. Lilah had been right, there was no way out. As Owen untied his horse, the sound of approaching riders drew his attention. 3 men on trail-worn horses were making their way up the main street, dust rising in their wake. Something about their manner, the way they surveyed the town, alert and assessing, triggered a warning in Owen's mind. He watched as they dismounted outside the saloon, noting the way their coats hung heavy on their right sides. Gun hands without question, but whose and for what purpose? The tallest of the 3 glanced in Owen's direction, and for a heart-stopping moment, recognition flared in the man's eyes. Owen lowered his head, mounting quickly and turning his horse toward the road leading out of town. It couldn't be. Not here, not now, but as he urged his horse into a trot, he knew with sickening certainty that his past had finally caught up with him. Those men were bounty hunters, and at least one of them knew exactly who Owen Xavier was and what price Wyoming would pay for his capture. Lilah was in the barn when Owen returned, brushing down her mare with methodical strokes that spoke more of seeking comfort than necessity. She looked up as he entered, hope flashing briefly in her eyes before reading his expression. No luck then. Garrett was clear, $500 by next Friday or they proceed with foreclosure. Owen removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I'm sorry, Lilah. She nodded, continuing to brush the horse. Thank you for trying, it's more than most would do. Owen hesitated, watching her work. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, golden strands catching the light that streamed through cracks in the barn walls. Despite everything, she remained beautiful, her strength and dignity intact even as her world crumbled around her. In that moment, Owen made a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation he'd cultivated over the past year. I need to tell you something, he said quietly. Something you should know before I. A horse's whinny from the yard interrupted him. Lilah frowned, moving to the barn door to peer out. We have visitors, she said, her voice suddenly tense. 3 men I don't recognize. Owen felt ice spread through his veins. Lilah, listen carefully, go to the house, stay inside, out of sight if possible. Why, who are they? Trouble, he moved beside her, keeping to the shadows as he assessed the situation. The 3 men from town were dismounting in the yard, their posture casual but their eyes alert, scanning the property with practiced efficiency. The tallest, a weathered man with a thick mustache and a star-shaped scar near his left eye, stepped forward. Hello, the house, he called. Anybody home? Owen drew back, his mind racing. They're bounty hunters looking for me. Lilah turned to him, shock and confusion warring in her expression. Bounty hunters. Owen, what are you saying? There's no time to explain everything, but I'm wanted in Wyoming territory for a murder I didn't commit, $500 dead or alive. Understanding dawned in her eyes. 500. The exact amount I need. The coincidence wasn't lost on either of them. Go out there, Owen said, making a swift decision. Tell them you haven't seen anyone matching my description. I'll slip out the back and draw them away from the ranch. And then what? They'll hunt you down. I'll take my chances, I've evaded them this long. Lilah shook her head. No, there has to be another way. Mrs. Morgan, the call came again, closer this time. We're looking for a man named Owen Xavier, heard he might be working these parts. Owen reached for his gun, checking that it was loaded. Lilah, please. I won't have your ranch become a battlefield, not after everything you've been through. She stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. Then, with a decisive motion, she grabbed a nearby pitchfork and thrust it into his hands. Take off your gun belt, she whispered urgently, then follow my lead. Before Owen could protest, she stepped out of the barn, shoulders straight, every inch the confident ranch owner despite her work-worn dress and loosened hair. Gentlemen, her voice carried clearly across the yard, this is private property, state your business or be on your way. Owen hesitated only a moment before removing his gun belt and hiding it beneath some straw. Taking the pitchfork, he stepped into the sunlight, keeping his head down as he began working at a nearby straw pile, his hat pulled low over his face. Ma'am, the leader of the group touched his hat. Name's Harker. These are my associates, Denton and Cruz. We're looking for a man wanted for murder in Wyoming territory. Owen Xavier, about 6 feet tall, dark hair, blue eyes. Heard he might have taken work in these parts. Lilah crossed her arms, her stance unyielding. Do you see my ranch, Mr. Harker? Does it look like I can afford to be particular about who I hire? No disrespect intended, ma'am, but Xavier is dangerous. Killed a man in cold blood over a card game in Laramie. The only man working my ranch is my husband, Lilah said, her voice steady despite the blatant lie. She gestured toward Owen without looking at him. As you can see, we're just trying to keep this place from falling apart. Owen kept his face averted, driving the pitchfork into the straw with more force than necessary, his heart hammering against his ribs. One glance, one moment of recognition, and everything would unravel. Harker studied him for a long moment. Your husband, you say? That's right, married 8 years come November. Lilah's voice didn't waver. Strange. We heard the Morgan ranch was owned by a widow woman. A beat of silence, heavy with danger. My first husband died 2 weeks ago, Lilah said, the truth giving weight to the lie. We married quietly afterwards. The town gossips simply haven't caught up yet. Owen felt Harker's eyes boring into him, searching for confirmation. Slowly, deliberately, he straightened and turned, keeping his expression neutral as he moved to stand beside Lilah. Gentlemen, he nodded, affecting a slight accent different from his usual speech. My wife and I have work to attend to, if you don't mind. In a gesture so natural it seemed rehearsed, Lilah slipped her arm through his, leaning slightly against his side. If you're looking for hands, the Bradshaw place north of here was hiring last I heard. Harker's eyes narrowed, studying Owen's face intently. For a terrifying moment, Owen was certain the game was up. Then the bounty hunter nodded slowly. Sorry to have troubled you, Mrs. Morgan, Lilah supplied, Mr. and Mrs. Morgan. Mrs. Morgan, if you do happen to see or hear of this Xavier, there's a substantial reward. $500. We'll keep that in mind, Lilah said, her grip tightening on Owen's arm. Good day, gentlemen. The three men mounted up reluctantly, Harker's suspicious gaze lingering on Owen until they finally turned their horses and rode slowly down the track toward the main road. Neither Lilah nor Owen moved until the riders disappeared from sight. Then, as if a string had been cut, Lilah sagged against him, her composure cracking. Inside, Owen murmured, guiding her toward the house, every sense alert for any sign the bounty hunters might return. They could be watching from the ridge. Once inside, with the door firmly closed behind them, Lilah rounded on him. A murderer, that's what you've been hiding all this time. I didn't kill anyone, Owen said, moving to the window to scan the surrounding countryside. It was a setup, a card game in Laramie. The man who died, Blackwell, was cheating. When I called him on it, he went for his gun. I was faster. Self-defense, then. Why are you wanted? Because Blackwell was the mayor's brother-in-law. And because the mayor owned the local judge. Owen turned to face her. I was convicted in absentia after I fled. The bounty was posted the next day. Lilah sank into a chair, the enormity of the situation settling over her. So everything you told me was a lie. No, Owen moved toward her, then stopped, respecting the distance she'd placed between them. Everything I told you about my past was true. Everything I've done here on the ranch has been honest work. The only lie was omitting why I was just passing through. She studied him, her expression unreadable. And now those men are hunting you for a reward that just happens to be exactly what I need to save this ranch. The implication hung in the air between them, stark and undeniable. Lilah, Owen said quietly, if you want me to leave, I will, or if you feel you need to turn me in, I'll understand. $500 would save everything you've worked for. You think I would trade a man's life for this ranch? Hurt and anger flashed in her eyes. Is that really what you believe of me? No, he admitted, but it would be the practical choice, and you're nothing if not practical. She stood, crossing to stand before him. There are some lines I won't cross, Owen Xavier. Not even to save this land. Relief washed through him, followed immediately by concern. They'll be back. Men like that don't give up easily, especially when they're not convinced. You put yourself in danger by lying for me. I know, she met his gaze steadily, but I couldn't stand by and watch them take you. The admission hung between them, charged with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. We need a plan, Owen said finally. They'll check your story in town, discover we're not really married. When they do, they'll come back with reinforcements, most likely. Then we need to convince them. Lilah's voice was calm, her mind clearly working through the problem. We need to make everyone believe we're married. How? The whole town knows Edward only died 2 weeks ago. No widow remarries that quickly. A faint flush colored Lilah's cheeks. Unless it wasn't really a new marriage at all. Owen frowned, not following. What do you mean? We tell people we were involved before Edward died, that we married quickly afterward out of necessity as much as choice. She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes directly. It's scandalous enough to be believable. People love nothing more than confirming their worst suspicions about their neighbors. The audacity of the plan stunned him. Lilah, your reputation is worth less to me than your life, she finished simply. Besides, my reputation is already in tatters the moment we claim to be married. Might as well make it a convincing story. Owen stared at her, this remarkable woman who had already lost so much, now willing to sacrifice her good name to protect a man she barely knew, a man with a price on his head. Why, he asked softly, why would you do this for me? Lilah's gaze didn't waver. Because in the few weeks you've been here, you've shown me more kindness and respect than most men have in a lifetime. Because you worked yourself to exhaustion trying to save a ranch that isn't yours. Because. She paused, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes. Because I believe in you, Owen, I believe you're innocent. The simple declaration struck him with more force than any bullet. How long had it been since anyone had believed in him? Since anyone had looked at him and seen not a fugitive or a hired hand but a man worthy of trust. If we do this, he said carefully, if we convince the town we're married, it buys us time but doesn't solve either problem. The bank will still foreclose, and the bounty hunters will still be watching. One problem at a time, Lilah replied. First, we make our marriage known in town, then we figure out how to save the ranch. And then we clear my name somehow, Owen finished. Simple as that. A smile touched her lips, the first real smile he'd seen since the bank letter arrived. Simple as that. As their eyes held, Owen felt something shift between them, a connection deeper than gratitude or obligation. Something that made the risk she was taking for him seem both impossible and inevitable. I'll need a ring, Lilah said suddenly, practical even in conspiracy, something to make it look official. Owen hesitated, then reached into his pocket, drawing out a small object he'd carried since leaving Texas. A plain silver band worn smooth with age. My mother's, he explained as Lilah's eyes widened, the only thing of value I took when I left home. Owen, I couldn't. Please, he held it out to her. If we're going to do this, we should do it right. After a moment's hesitation, Lilah extended her left hand. With surprising solemnity, Owen slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly loose, but not so much that it would fall off. The weight of the moment, this mock ceremony with real consequences, settled around them like a physical presence. Owen found himself still holding her hand, unable or unwilling to let go. If this works, he said softly, it changes everything for both of us. Yes, Lilah agreed. But sometimes change is what we need most, even when it's not what we planned. Outside, the Montana sun began its western descent, casting long shadows across the yard where, just minutes ago, 3 men had nearly ended Owen's freedom, or his life. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new complications, but tonight, in this quiet moment of shared conspiracy, Owen Xavier felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time: hope. The following morning, they rode into Cottonwood Creek together, Lilah sitting side-saddle on her mare, wearing her best dress, a deep green calico that brought out flecks of the same color in her blue eyes. Owen rode beside her, newly shaven, his dark hair still damp from washing, wearing the cleanest clothes he owned. To anyone watching, they presented the picture of a respectable ranching couple on a supply run, not a widow and a fugitive engaged in desperate deception. Remember, Lilah murmured as they approached the town, we've been married 1 week, a small ceremony with just Reverend Palmer present. Owen nodded, adjusting his hat. And we met when I was passing through 3 months ago, looking for work. I hired you to help with the spring calving. We grew close during Edward's frequent absences on cattle buying trips. The story was plausible enough. Edward Morgan had indeed been away often, trying to rebuild his herd after the previous winter's losses. That much was common knowledge in town. The most convincing lies contain elements of truth, Owen observed quietly. Lilah shot him a sidelong glance. You sound experienced in deception. Only in self-preservation. He held her gaze for a moment. This is the first time I've lied to protect someone else along with myself. Something in his tone made her cheeks flush slightly. She looked away, adjusting her skirts with gloved hands. Let's hope we're convincing, then. Their first stop was the general store, where Mrs. Prescott's renowned appetite for gossip would ensure their news spread rapidly. The bell over the door jangled as they entered. Clara Prescott looked up from arranging a display of canned goods, her expression shifting from shopkeeper's welcome to scandalized curiosity in an instant as she noted their arrival together. Mrs. Morgan, she greeted, eyes darting between them. Mr. Xavier, isn't it? What can I help you with today? Mrs. Prescott, Lilah nodded cordially. We need supplies for the ranch, and please, it's Mrs. Xavier now, though I'm still using Morgan for business purposes. The calculated bombshell had its intended effect. Clara's eyes widened, her hand fluttering to her throat. I beg your pardon. We were married last week, Owen supplied, placing a protective hand at the small of Lilah's back, a gesture that felt both forced and strangely natural. A quiet ceremony. But Edward only, Clara caught herself. That is, congratulations, how unexpected. Life is full of unexpected turns, Mrs. Prescott, Lilah said smoothly. Now we'll need coffee, flour, sugar, and salt. And some of that canned peach preserve if you still have it. As Lilah listed their supplies, Clara busied herself gathering items, her movements hurried and distracted. Owen could practically see the wheels turning in her mind, calculating how quickly she could spread this scandalous news once they departed. Will you be attending church services this Sunday? Clara asked, an innocent question loaded with implication. Of course, Lilah replied. We are, after all, respectable members of this community. The slight emphasis on respectable was not lost on Clara, whose lips thinned in suppressed excitement. By Sunday, every person in Cottonwood Creek would know of the scandalous quick remarriage of the Morgan widow. As they loaded their supplies onto Owen's horse, Lilah maintained her composed expression, though Owen could sense the tension beneath her calm exterior. One down, he murmured. Where next? The bank, Lilah said decisively. Garrett should hear our marriage from us directly. It strengthens the story if we're open about it. Owen nodded, though concern flickered through him. Walking into the bank meant deliberately placing himself in proximity to the man who had declared the Morgan Ranch a lost cause, and who might connect him to the wanted posters if Harker had already made inquiries. The risk was necessary, he knew. For their deception to work, they needed to brazen it out in the most public venues possible. Garrett was at his desk when they entered, his eyebrows rising in surprise at the sight of them. Mrs. Morgan, he greeted, deliberately ignoring Owen. I wasn't expecting you until next week. I thought we should speak before then, Lilah replied, and to introduce my husband properly. Charles Garrett, this is Owen Xavier Morgan. The deliberate use of both names, his real first name paired with her surname, was a calculated risk. If Harker had already been asking questions, the name Owen would raise flags. But denying his true identity completely would make any slip-up later more damning. Garrett's expression remained neutral, though his eyes sharpened with interest. Husband, I was unaware of your remarriage. Quite precipitous, isn't it? We prefer to think of it as practical, Owen said, meeting the banker's gaze directly. A woman alone can't run a ranch effectively, as I believe you've pointed out. Indeed, Garrett's tone was dry. And this sudden development changes what about your financial situation, Mrs. Morgan, or should I say, Mrs. Morgan Xavier? Nothing immediately, Lilah admitted. But with two of us working the ranch, our prospects for meeting future payments improve considerably. I see, Garrett leaned back in his chair. Unfortunately, the outstanding debt remains due next week. Your marital status doesn't alter the bank's position. We understand, Owen said, placing a hand over Lilah's in a gesture both possessive and supportive. We're exploring options to raise the necessary funds. I wish you luck, Garrett replied, his tone suggesting he expected none. Though I must say, Mrs. Morgan, your late husband would be surprised by how quickly you found consolation. The deliberate cruelty of the remark made Owen tense, but Lilah's hand squeezed his warningly. Edward and I had an arrangement of mutual convenience, Mr. Garrett, much like the one you propose with the bank business without sentiment. She stood, signaling the end of the conversation. We'll see you next Friday as scheduled. Outside, Owen released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That man is not worth your anger, Lilah finished quietly. Save it for the real battles ahead. They mounted their horses, aware of curious stares from townsfolk who had undoubtedly already heard the news from Mrs. Prescott's busy telegraph of gossip. One more stop, Lilah said as they rode slowly down the main street, the saloon. Owen frowned. No respectable woman enters the saloon. Exactly, nothing will cement our story faster than a proper lady-breaking convention to stand by her new husband. A smile touched her lips. Besides, if Harker and his men are still in town, that's where they'll be. It's too dangerous, Owen protested, if they recognize me. They've seen both of us already, presenting ourselves as married. Avoiding public places now would only raise suspicion. Her gaze met his, steady and determined. Trust me, Owen, this is how we sell the story. Against his better judgment, Owen found himself nodding. There was a certain logic to her strategy, risky as it was, and something in her confident demeanor made him want to believe this audacious plan might actually work. The Cottonwood Creek Saloon was doing steady business despite the early hour. Conversations paused as they entered, Lilah's presence causing more of a stir than any gunfight could have. Owen scanned the room quickly, noting with relief that Harker and his men were nowhere to be seen. Mr. Morgan, the bartender called, using the name they'd established, and Mrs. Morgan. This is an unexpected pleasure. Hello, Sam, Lilah replied with perfect composure, as if she regularly frequented saloons in the middle of the day. My husband and I would like 2 whiskeys, please. The collective shock that rippled through the room was almost palpable. Owen guided Lilah to the bar, acutely aware of every eye following their movement. You sure about this? He murmured. Sometimes the best defense is a bold offense, she replied quietly. Besides, I've always wondered what this place looked like inside. The bartender placed 2 glasses before them, his expression struggling between professional neutrality and burning curiosity. To new beginnings, Lilah said, raising her glass in a toast. Owen touched his glass to hers, marveling at the transformation of the reserved widow into this confident, strategic woman playing a dangerous game with apparent ease. New beginnings, he echoed, then downed his whiskey in one swallow. Lilah sipped hers more delicately, but to Owen's surprise didn't flinch at the burn. She set the glass down with a decisive motion, then slipped her arm through his. I believe we've made our point, she said, loud enough to be heard by nearby tables. Shall we head home, husband? The possessive term sent an unexpected warmth through Owen's chest. Of course, he replied, playing his role with matching conviction. There's much to do at the ranch. As they walked out together, Owen could feel the speculation building behind them like a physical force. By nightfall, their performance would be the talk of every household in Cottonwood Creek, exactly as Lilah had intended. That should do it, she said as they mounted their horses. By tomorrow, no one will question our marriage. And when the bounty hunters return, they'll find Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, upstanding ranch owners with witnesses to their matrimony all over town. She smiled, a flash of genuine pleasure breaking through the calculated facade. Not a wanted man in sight. As they rode back toward the ranch, Owen studied her profile against the clear blue sky. In the span of 24 hours, this remarkable woman had transformed from a desperate widow to his co-conspirator and pretend wife, risking her reputation and safety for a man she barely knew. Why are you doing all this? He asked suddenly. The truth, Lilah. She was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the steady rhythm of their horses' hooves on the dusty road. Because you were kind when you didn't have to be, she said finally. Because you worked to save my ranch without expectation of reward. Because... She hesitated, then met his gaze directly. Because when I'm with you, I feel less alone. Less afraid of what tomorrow brings. The simple honesty of her answer struck Owen with unexpected force. How long had it been since anyone had valued his presence as something more than hired labor? How long since he'd allowed himself to care what happened to another person? I feel the same, he admitted quietly, though I have no right to. Rights have nothing to do with feelings, Lilah replied. They come unbidden, like spring after a hard winter. The poetry of her words hung between them as they continued homeward, the afternoon sun warm on their backs, the future uncertain but somehow less daunting for being faced together. The next few days established a new rhythm to their shared life. In public, they played the roles of newlyweds with careful attention to detail, standing close together, exchanging meaningful glances, Lilah's hand often resting on Owen's arm. In private, they maintained a respectful distance, Owen still sleeping in the bunkhouse despite their pretense. Yet something had shifted between them, a new awareness, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings neither was ready to name. Their conversations over meals lingered longer, their work around the ranch became more synchronized, as if they'd been partners for years rather than weeks. On Saturday evening, Owen returned from repairing a distant section of fence to find Lilah on the porch, a letter in her hands and a troubled expression on her face. "Bad news?" he asked, removing his hat as he approached. "A letter from Edward's brother in Boston," she replied. "He's heard about our marriage and is outraged, says he's coming west to address this insult to his brother's memory." Owen frowned. "When?" "He doesn't say exactly, but knowing Thomas, he won't waste time." She folded the letter carefully. "This complicates things." "He can't force you to do anything," Owen pointed out. "You're a grown woman." "No, but he can create difficulties, ask uncomfortable questions, and he knew Edward better than anyone if there are inconsistencies in our story." The implication hung between them. Their carefully constructed deception might not withstand close scrutiny from someone who knew the Morgan family intimately. "We'll deal with that when it happens," Owen said, more confidently than he felt. "For now, we focus on tomorrow." Tomorrow was Sunday church services, where they would face the entire community together for the first time as a married couple. It would be the true test of their performance. "Yes," Lilah agreed, rising from her chair, "one challenge at a time." As she moved to enter the house, Owen caught her hand gently. "Lilah, whatever happens with the bank, with the bounty hunters, with your brother-in-law, I want you to know I'm grateful for everything you've done." She turned back to him, her expression softening in the fading light. "You would have done the same for me." Yes, Owen realized with sudden clarity, I would have. For a moment, they stood close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her blue eyes, could smell the faint lavender scent she used. The urge to close that small distance between them was nearly overwhelming. Instead, he released her hand and stepped back. "Good night, Lilah." "Good night, Owen." As he walked to the bunkhouse, Owen found himself wondering how a deception, a necessary lie, could feel more honest than anything he'd experienced in years. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the late summer air carrying the first hint of autumn coolness. Lilah wore her best dress, deep blue with delicate white lace at the collar and cuffs, and Owen his only suit, somewhat trail-worn but presentable enough for church services. They rode into town in the small buggy Edward had purchased in more prosperous times, presenting the picture of respectable ranchers despite the whispers that would inevitably follow them. "Ready?" Owen asked as he helped Lilah down from the buggy outside the white clapboard church. She adjusted his slightly crooked tie with familiar ease, a gesture that felt both practiced and startlingly intimate. "As ready as I'll ever be." The congregation's reaction was exactly as expected, conversations faltering as they entered, heads turning, expressions ranging from scandalized to merely curious. Reverend Palmer, a kind-faced man in his 60s, greeted them with careful neutrality. "Mrs. Morgan, that is, Mrs. Xavier Morgan," he corrected himself. "Mr. Xavier Morgan." "Welcome." "Thank you, Reverend," Lilah replied, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush. "We appreciate your understanding of our unique circumstances." The diplomatic phrasing drew a few disapproving sniffs from the older church members, but Reverend Palmer merely nodded. "The Lord works in mysterious ways. Please take a seat." They settled into a pew near the back, conscious of the stares still directed their way. Owen's hand found Lilah's, squeezing gently in silent support. She returned the pressure, her gloved fingers intertwining with his. The service proceeded normally, though Owen noticed Reverend Palmer's sermon touched heavily on themes of forgiveness and judgment, perhaps a deliberate choice given the circumstances. Throughout, he remained acutely aware of Lilah beside him, of the warmth of her shoulder against his, of the subtle floral scent of her hair. This pretense of marriage was becoming dangerously comfortable. As the congregation filed out afterward, they faced the inevitable gauntlet of community scrutiny. Most offered polite if reserved greetings. A few, primarily Edward's former friends, pointedly ignored them. And Clara Prescott predictably maneuvered to place herself directly in their path. "Such a lovely service," she gushed, her eyes alight with barely concealed curiosity. "And how is married life treating you both so? Convenient that you found each other so quickly after poor Edward's passing." The emphasis on convenient carried clear insinuation. "Very fortunate," Owen replied smoothly, his arm sliding protectively around Lilah's waist. "Though the circumstances are not what either of us would have chosen." "Of course not," Clara agreed insincerely. "And will you be staying in Cottonwood Creek long-term, Mr. Xavier, or should I say Mr. Morgan now?" "Xavier Morgan," he corrected. "And yes, our intention is to build our life here. The ranch has potential with proper management." "How ambitious," Clara's gaze shifted to Lilah. "And what does your late husband's family think of this arrangement? I understand the Morgans are quite prominent in Boston society." The probing question confirmed Owen's suspicion that news traveled fast in Cottonwood Creek. Thomas Morgan's impending visit was apparently already common knowledge. "Family matters remain private, Mrs. Prescott," Lilah replied with gentle firmness. "Now if you'll excuse us, we have ranch business to attend to." They were making their way toward their buggy when Owen spotted them, Harker and his men, standing beside the livery stable across the street. They weren't watching the church directly, but their presence was no coincidence. "Don't look now," he murmured to Lilah, "but our friends from the other day are back." She nodded almost imperceptibly, maintaining her composure. "Then we give them exactly what they expect to see, a happily married couple with nothing to hide." With deliberate casualness, she turned to face Owen, reaching up to straighten his collar. The gesture placed her directly in his line of sight, blocking his view of the bounty hunters and theirs of his face. "Kiss me," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. Owen hesitated, caught off guard by the request despite its obvious strategic value. "Lilah, they're watching now, make it convincing." There was no time to consider the implications. Owen cupped her face gently, leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. He had intended a brief, chaste kiss, enough to maintain their cover without crossing boundaries that might complicate their already precarious situation. But the moment their lips met, something shifted. Lilah's hands came up to rest against his chest, and what began as pretense transformed into something undeniably real. The kiss deepened, her lips soft and responsive beneath his. Owen forgot about the watching bounty hunters, forgot about the scandalized churchgoers, forgot about everything except the woman in his arms and the surprising rightness of holding her this way. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, the world came rushing back in, including the very real danger still watching from across the street. "That should give them something to think about," Lilah whispered, a flush coloring her cheeks. "And half the town as well," Owen replied, his voice rougher than intended. As they drove away in their buggy, Owen was acutely aware that something fundamental had changed between them, a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. The pretense of marriage was becoming less of a performance and more of a revelation with each passing day. Back at the ranch, they moved through their afternoon chores with heightened awareness of each other, neither mentioning the kiss but both clearly affected by it. The easy camaraderie of previous days had been replaced by a charged tension that made even passing in the doorway feel significant. That evening, as darkness fell, they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance above the tall grass. The silence between them was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, simply weighted with unspoken thoughts. "We should talk about what happened," Owen said finally. Lilah nodded, her hands folded in her lap. "Yes. We should. That kiss. Was necessary, she finished, to maintain our story. Yes, Owen studied her profile in the gathering darkness, but it wasn't just that, was it? She turned to face him, vulnerability and honesty warring in her expression. No, it wasn't just that. The simple admission hung between them, fraught with implications neither fully understood. Lilah, Owen began, then stopped, searching for words. This started as a deception, a necessary one but still a lie. And now it's becoming something else, she finished quietly, something neither of us planned. Yes. Silence fell again as they contemplated this unexpected development. We still face the same problems, Owen pointed out. The bank, the bounty hunters, your brother-in-law. Nothing has changed. Everything has changed, Lilah countered softly. Or perhaps it's only that we're finally acknowledging what was already there. The truth of her words resonated in Owen's chest. From that first day working together on the fallen fence, something had drawn him to this remarkable woman. Her strength, her determination, her unfailing kindness despite her own hardships, all had worked their way past defenses built over a lifetime of keeping people at a distance. I can't offer you anything, Lilah, he said finally. Not while I'm a wanted man, not while the ranch faces foreclosure. It wouldn't be fair to either of us to pretend otherwise. I'm not asking for promises, Owen. Her voice was steady, though her eyes reflected the same conflict he felt. Only honesty between us, whatever comes. Honesty, he repeated. Then honestly, Lilah Morgan, I think I'm falling in love with you, and honestly, that terrifies me more than any bounty hunter. The words once spoken couldn't be reclaimed. They hung in the night air, raw and true and frightening in their implications. Lilah's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers warm against his palm. Then we're both terrified. Because I think I'm falling in love with you too. The admission should have complicated everything. Instead, Owen felt a curious sense of peace settle over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many, at least there would be no more pretense between them. As if to seal this new understanding, he leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she met him halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss unburdened by performance or strategy, simply the natural expression of feelings too powerful to deny any longer. When they parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the cool night air. What happens now? Now we face whatever comes, Lilah replied, together. Together. The word carried both promise and peril. But as they sat hand in hand beneath the vast Montana sky, Owen Xavier allowed himself to believe that perhaps, against all odds, they might find a way forward through the gathering storm. The storm broke sooner than expected. Dawn was just lightening the eastern sky when the sound of approaching riders brought Owen instantly awake in the bunkhouse. He grabbed his gun, moving to the window with the caution of a man accustomed to danger. 5 riders, not Harker and his men. The horses and postures were wrong. These were well-dressed Easterners, city men uncomfortable in the saddle. At their lead was a man whose bearing and features suggested a family resemblance to Edward Morgan. Thomas Morgan had arrived and he'd brought reinforcements. Owen dressed quickly, buckling on his gun belt with grim determination. Whatever Thomas intended, he wouldn't find Lilah defenseless. He was halfway to the main house when Lilah emerged, hastily dressed, her hair still loose around her shoulders. She looked from Owen to the approaching riders, understanding dawning in her eyes. Thomas, she confirmed. And probably lawyers from the bank, earlier than I expected. Stay inside, Owen suggested. Let me handle this first meeting. She shook her head, coming to stand beside him. We face this together, remember. There was no time to argue. The riders had reached the yard, Thomas Morgan's expression darkening as he spotted them standing side by side. Lilah, he called, dismounting with the awkward movements of a man unused to horses. What is the meaning of this outrageous behavior? Edward barely cold in his grave, and you remarry without so much as a letter to inform the family. Thomas Morgan was perhaps 40, with the soft physique of a businessman who took most of his exercise walking from office to restaurant. His expensive suit was already showing dust from the ride, and his face was flushed with exertion and indignation. Hello, Thomas, Lilah replied calmly. I see you received my letter, though I don't recall inviting you to visit. How could you expect me not to come when I heard you had, he broke off, glaring at Owen. Who is this man, really? Some fortune-hunting drifter who saw an opportunity to acquire my brother's property. This is my husband, Owen Xavier Morgan, Lilah said, her voice steady despite the provocation. And this is our ranch now. Your husband, Thomas repeated incredulously. 3 weeks after Edward's death, do you take me for a fool? What I take you for is irrelevant, Lilah replied. The marriage is legal and binding. The property is jointly ours. Thomas turned to his companions, 3 men in business suits who had dismounted with similar discomfort. You see, gentlemen, exactly as I described. My sister-in-law has clearly been coerced or manipulated by this individual. No one has coerced me into anything, Thomas, Lilah said, a dangerous edge entering her voice. I suggest you and your friends leave. You're trespassing on private property. I think not, Thomas drew himself up importantly. Mr. Garrett, would you please explain the situation to my wayward sister-in-law? One of the men stepped forward, and Owen recognized the banker from their previous encounter. Garrett's expression was smug, his manner condescending. Mrs. Morgan, or whatever you choose to call yourself now, your brother-in-law has acquired the note on this property from the bank. As of yesterday, he holds all rights and interest in the Morgan ranch. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Lilah swayed slightly beside Owen, her composure cracking for the first time. That's not possible. The payment isn't due until Friday. The bank has the right to sell or transfer any note at its discretion, Garrett explained with obvious satisfaction. Mr. Morgan made an attractive offer, payment in full of the outstanding debt, plus a generous consideration for the bank's trouble. You had no right, Lilah began, but Thomas cut her off. I had every right. This property belonged to my brother. I'll not see it fall into the hands of some fortune-hunting cowboy who seduced a vulnerable widow. He turned to Owen, contempt evident in every line of his face. You, sir, will vacate these premises immediately. Any personal property you can prove is yours you may take, nothing more. Owen's hand instinctively moved toward his gun, but Lilah's fingers closed around his wrist, stopping him. He looked down to see her almost imperceptibly shake her head. And if we refuse, she asked, her voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. Thomas smiled thinly. I've anticipated resistance. He gestured toward the 5th rider who had remained mounted throughout the exchange. This gentleman is a deputy U.S. Marshal. He has the authority to enforce my property rights should that prove necessary. The man Thomas indicated touched his hat brim in acknowledgement, his weathered face impassive. But it was the badge on his chest that sent ice through Owen's veins. A U.S. Marshal would almost certainly have access to wanted posters from Wyoming territory. We'll need time to gather our belongings, Lilah said, her mind clearly working rapidly. Until sundown at least. Thomas considered this, then nodded grudgingly. Until sundown, not a minute longer, the deputy will remain to ensure compliance. The implicit threat was clear. If they hadn't vacated by sunset, force would be used. Thank you for your generosity, Lilah replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Now if you'll excuse us, we have packing to do. She turned, her back straight despite the crushing defeat, and walked toward the house. Owen followed, acutely aware of 5 pairs of eyes tracking their movement. Once inside, with the door firmly closed, Lilah's composure finally cracked. She sank into a chair, her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Owen knelt beside her, his own shock and anger temporarily set aside in the face of her distress. Lilah, he said gently, we'll figure this out. How? She demanded, looking up with tear-streaked cheeks. They've taken everything, the ranch, the cattle, even the furniture. We have until sundown to disappear. Then we disappear, Owen said simply. We take what we can carry and we start over somewhere else. Start over, Lilah laughed bitterly. With what? I have maybe $20 to my name. You're a wanted man. Where exactly do we go, Owen? The harsh reality of their situation settled around them like a physical weight. In the space of 10 minutes, they had lost everything, the ranch, their fragile security, even the tentative future they'd just begun to imagine together. I don't know, Owen admitted. But I do know this: Thomas Morgan and Charles Garrett haven't won yet, not while we still have choices. Lilah wiped her tears with the back of her hand, visibly gathering her composure. What choices? They hold all the cards. Not all of them, Owen rose, moving to the window to ensure they weren't being overheard. The marshal is the immediate problem if he identifies me. Then we leave before he can, Lilah finished, understanding dawning. We pack what we can and slip away while Thomas is still gloating over his victory. Yes, Owen turned back to face her. But Lilah, you need to understand what that means. If you come with me, you're choosing a fugitive's life. Always moving, always looking over our shoulders. It's no kind of existence for anyone, especially someone who's known stability. She studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes still bright with unshed tears but her expression resolute. What's my alternative? Stay here and watch Thomas dismantle everything Edward and I built. Accept his charity as a poor relation back in Boston. Allow him to arrange some suitable marriage to a business associate. The bitterness in her voice spoke volumes about the life she envisioned under her brother-in-law's control. At least you'd be safe, Owen pointed out quietly. Respectable. Safe and respectable, Lilah repeated, two things I've never particularly valued above freedom and honesty. She stood, moving to face him directly. I choose you, Owen Xavier, fugitive or not, I choose you. The simple declaration left him momentarily speechless. After a lifetime of keeping people at a distance, of expecting betrayal rather than loyalty, Owen found himself confronted with a devotion he'd done nothing to deserve. I can't ask you to give up everything for me, he said finally. You're not asking, I'm offering. She held his gaze steadily. Unless you don't want me with you. Want has nothing to do with it, Owen said, his voice rough with emotion. I want you with me more than I've wanted anything in my life, but wanting something and doing what's right aren't always the same thing. Sometimes they are. Lilah stepped closer, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek. Sometimes the heart knows what's right long before the head catches up. The truth of her words resonated through him. Whatever the future held, hardship, danger, uncertainty, facing it with Lilah by his side seemed infinitely preferable to safety without her. All right, he said finally, we leave together, but first we make a plan. By noon their preparations were complete. They had packed essentials, clothing, food, Owen's tools, Lilah's few pieces of jewelry, and what little money they had between them. 2 horses were saddled and ready in the barn, out of sight of the house where Thomas Morgan and his associates had taken up residence, the U.S. Marshal keeping watch from the porch. The deputy hasn't taken his eyes off the front of the house for hours, Owen observed from the barn window, but he can't see the back approach to the barn from there. So we wait until they're distracted, Lilah said, checking the saddlebags one final time. She had changed into riding clothes, sturdy trousers and a practical shirt beneath a leather vest, her hair braided and tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Then we ride out through the north pasture. Owen nodded, impressed by her foresight and practical nature. Many women would be collapsing in hysterics at the prospect of leaving behind a lifetime of possessions and security. Lilah was planning escape routes. Once we clear Morgan land, we head west, he said, tracing the route on a rough map he'd drawn in the dust. There's a line shack about 15 miles on, where we can rest the horses and figure out our next move. Lilah studied the map, committing it to memory, and after that. Montana's a big territory. We keep moving until we're sure we've lost any pursuit, then we find somewhere to start over. The simplicity of the plan belied its audacity. 2 people with limited resources, one of them a wanted man, attempting to vanish into the vastness of the Western Territories. The odds were long at best. It'll work, Lilah said, as if reading his thoughts. We'll make it work. Her confidence was infectious, despite the rational part of Owen's mind that catalogued all the ways they might fail. He found himself nodding, drawing strength from her certainty. We just need the right diversion, he said, something to draw the marshal's attention long enough for us to slip away. As if in answer to his words, the sound of approaching riders drifted through the barn's open door. Owen moved quickly to the window, tense with anticipation of further complications. What he saw instead was opportunity. Harker, he breathed, recognizing the bounty hunter and his two associates riding boldly up to the main house. And he's looking mighty pleased with himself. Lilah joined him at the window, her shoulder pressed against his as they watched the scene unfold. Harker dismounted, approaching the porch where the marshal stood. Words were exchanged, too distant to hear, but the body language was clear. Harker was making a claim, gesturing emphatically toward the house where, he believed, Owen Xavier was hiding. The marshal straightened, suddenly alert. Thomas Morgan emerged from the house, his expression shifting from annoyance to interest as Harker continued speaking. "He's telling them about the bounty," Owen surmised. $500 for a murderer from Wyoming Territory. "And coincidentally describing a man who matches your description perfectly," Lilah added grimly. They watched as the marshal nodded, his hand moving to rest on his gun belt. Thomas's expression darkened with outrage, clearly the idea that his sister-in-law had married not just a fortune hunter but a wanted criminal was too much to bear. "There's our diversion," Owen said quietly. "They'll be searching the house for me, that's our chance to slip away." As if confirming his assessment, the marshal drew his pistol and followed Thomas and Harker into the house, leaving only the two bounty hunters and the bank representatives outside. "Now," Owen urged, taking Lilah's hand, "while they're focused on the house." They led the horses quietly out the barn's rear door, keeping the building between themselves and the yard. The north pasture stretched before them, a vast expanse of golden grass leading toward distant hills. Freedom was tantalizingly close. They were mounting up when a shout from behind shattered their hopes. There, by the barn, one of Harker's men had spotted them. In moments, the yard erupted into chaos, men running, guns drawn, horses being hastily mounted. "Ride," Owen commanded, spurring his horse forward. "Don't look back." Lilah needed no urging. She was already ahead of him, her mare galloping across the open pasture with impressive speed. Owen followed, ducking low over his horse's neck as the first shots rang out behind them. The bullets fell short. The distance was still too great for accurate pistol fire, but the message was clear. This was no longer simply a property dispute or even a bounty hunt. This was a manhunt with potentially deadly consequences. They rode hard for the tree line that marked the edge of Morgan property, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. Owen risked a glance back to see four riders giving chase, Harker, his two men, and the U.S. Marshal, all closing the distance with alarming speed. The trees offered momentary shelter, the dense pines forcing their pursuers to slow and navigate the same obstacles. Owen led them onto a game trail, narrow but clear enough for single-file riding. "This way," he called to Lilah, who was keeping pace remarkably well despite her limited experience with hard riding. "There's a creek ahead. We can use it to mask our trail." They splashed through the shallow water, following its course downstream for nearly half a mile before climbing the rocky bank on the far side, a basic but effective tactic to confuse trackers. For 2 hours, they pushed the horses as hard as they dared through increasingly rugged terrain, using every trick Owen had learned in his months as a fugitive. They doubled back, split up and rejoined, took advantage of rocky ground that wouldn't hold tracks. By late afternoon, the sounds of pursuit had faded. They'd reached the foothills of the mountain range that formed the western boundary of what had been Morgan land, the line shack Owen mentioned just visible in a sheltered hollow ahead. "We should rest the horses," Owen said as they approached the small structure, "and ourselves, it'll be dark soon." Lilah nodded, her face flushed from exertion but her eyes bright with the strange exhilaration that sometimes accompanies danger survived. "Do you think we lost them?" "For now," Owen dismounted, helping her down from her mare. "But they'll keep looking, the marshal because it's his job, Harker for the bounty, and your brother-in-law out of pure vindictiveness." "Then we keep moving," Lilah said simply. "First light tomorrow." The line shack was crude but serviceable, a single room with a small stove, rough bunk, and basic provisions left for passing cowboys. Owen tended to the horses while Lilah inventoried their supplies and started a small fire in the stove. As darkness fell, they ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, conserving their limited provisions. The gravity of their situation, fugitives with minimal resources and determined pursuers, had settled over them, replacing the initial adrenaline of escape with somber reality. You could still go back, Owen said finally, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. Claim I kidnapped you. With your brother-in-law's connections, they might believe it. Lilah looked up from the cup of coffee she'd been staring into, her expression incredulous. After everything we've been through today, you're still trying to send me away. I'm trying to give you options, Owen clarified, a way out if you want it. I made my choice, Owen. Back at the ranch when I told you I was coming with you, she set her cup down with deliberate care, unless you've changed your mind about wanting me with you. No, the denial came swiftly, emphatically. That's not it at all. Then what? Lilah's voice softened. What are you really afraid of? The question cut to the heart of his hesitation. Owen stared into the small fire, gathering his thoughts. I'm afraid of what happens 6 months from now, he admitted finally, or a year. When you've been living in shabby rooms and working menial jobs because no respectable establishment will hire a woman traveling with a man who isn't her real husband. When you've had to leave friends behind because we can't risk staying in one place too long. When you realize everything you sacrificed for a man who might never be able to give you the life you deserve. Lilah was quiet for a long moment, absorbing his words. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful but resolute. Do you know what I'm afraid of? She asked. I'm afraid of a life half-lived, of safety purchased at the cost of freedom and genuine connection. Of looking back at 80 years old and realizing I chose security over love. She moved to kneel beside him, taking his hands in hers. I know what I'm giving up, Owen, and I know what I'm gaining. The scales balance, at least for me. The simple sincerity of her declaration disarmed him completely. Here in this crude shelter, with nothing but uncertainty before them, Lilah Morgan was offering him something he'd never expected to find: unconditional acceptance, a partnership based on choice rather than convenience or obligation. Then I guess we're in this together, he said softly, reaching out to touch her cheek. Whatever comes. Together, she agreed, leaning into his touch. The kiss that followed was both a promise and a beginning, an acknowledgement that whatever path lay ahead, they would walk it side by side. Outside, night had fully descended, stars emerging in the vast Montana sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But for this moment in this place they had found something precious amid the chaos of their circumstances, a connection strong enough to risk everything for. As they settled onto the narrow bunk, wrapped in blankets against the mountain chill, Owen held Lilah close, marveling at how his life had transformed in just a few short weeks. From solitary fugitive to a man with something, someone worth protecting at all costs. Sleep, he murmured as her breathing began to slow. I'll keep watch. But Lilah was already drifting, secure in his embrace despite the precariousness of their situation. Owen listened to her steady breathing, one hand lightly stroking her golden hair, his mind working through the challenges that awaited them. They would need money, new identities eventually. A destination far enough from Montana and Wyoming to start fresh without constant fear of discovery. As plans formed and reformed in his thoughts, one certainty remained constant. The woman sleeping trustingly in his arms was worth any risk, any sacrifice. Together, they would find a way forward through whatever trials lay ahead. With that determination firmly fixed in his mind, Owen Xavier finally allowed himself to rest, his arms still protectively encircling the woman who had chosen to share his uncertain future. Dawn broke with gunfire. Owen was instantly awake, reaching for his pistol even as he registered the sound of bullets splintering the cabin's wooden walls. Lilah sat up beside him, sleep confusion giving way to alarm as understanding dawned. They've found us, she whispered unnecessarily. Stay down, Owen commanded, moving to the small window with practiced caution. He risked a glimpse outside, then ducked back as another shot shattered the glass. 4 riders, the same pursuers as yesterday, had positioned themselves strategically around the cabin. The marshal called out from behind the cover of a large pine. Xavier, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up and the woman unharmed. What do we do? Lilah asked, her voice steady despite the dire circumstances. Owen assessed their options rapidly. The cabin had only one door and 2 small windows. The horses were tethered outside within sight of their pursuers. Escape seemed impossible. We talk, he decided. Try to reason with the marshal at least. He's the only one out there with any official authority. And if reasoning fails? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither wanted to consider. Then we fight, Owen said simply, but let's try words first. He moved to position himself beside the shattered window, keeping out of direct line of fire. Marshal, he called, I want to talk. A pause then, talk then. But know that I have a warrant for your arrest, Xavier. You're coming back to Wyoming one way or another. The woman is here by choice, Owen replied. She's done nothing wrong. That's for a judge to decide, came the answer. Aiding a fugitive is a crime in itself. Owen exchanged a troubled glance with Lilah. The implication was clear, they intended to arrest her as well, likely on charges Thomas Morgan had fabricated. I'll surrender, Owen called back, if you guarantee her safety and freedom. Owen, no, Lilah grabbed his arm. You can't. I can if it saves you, he interrupted quietly. This was always where it was headed, Lilah. We both knew that. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me, she insisted. There has to be another way. Before Owen could respond, the marshal's voice came again. No negotiations, Xavier, you're both coming in. You have 1 minute to come out with your hands up, or we start shooting to kill. The ultimatum eliminated any hope of a peaceful resolution. Owen moved quickly, checking his pistol and the rifle they'd brought from the ranch. There's a back wall with no windows, he said, thinking rapidly. If we can break through it while they're focused on the door and front windows. Lilah was already moving, gathering their essential supplies into a single pack. The horses are still out front, we'd be on foot. Better than dead or in chains. Owen began examining the rear wall, looking for a weak point they might exploit. The construction was crude, vertical planks nailed to a simple frame. With enough force they might be able to create an opening. Time's up, Xavier, the marshal shouted. This is your last warning. Instead of answering, Owen grabbed the small table, turning it on its side to use as a battering ram against the rear wall. When I break through, run for the trees, he instructed Lilah. Don't look back, don't hesitate. She nodded grimly, slinging the pack over her shoulder and positioning herself to follow him. With a powerful thrust, Owen drove the table edge into the weathered planks. The wood cracked but held. He pulled back for another attempt. Gunfire erupted from outside, not the warning shots of before, but a concentrated barrage aimed at doors and windows. Splinters flew as bullets tore through the cabin's thin walls. Owen rammed the table against the back wall again, this time feeling the wood give way. A third effort created a hole large enough to squeeze through. Now, he shouted, dropping the table and pushing Lilah toward the opening. Go. She hesitated only a fraction of a second before slipping through the jagged hole. Owen followed, the pack of supplies hampering his movements. A sharp edge caught his shirt, tearing fabric and skin beneath. They emerged into the gray dawn light, the dense forest just 30 yards away across open ground. It might as well have been 30 miles. Run, Owen urged, ignoring the warm trickle of blood from the gash in his side. Straight for the trees. They sprinted across the open space, painfully exposed. Behind them, shouts indicated their escape had been discovered. The gunfire shifted, bullets kicking up dirt at their heels, 20 yards to the trees, 15, 10. A shot cracked past Owen's ear, close enough that he felt the displaced air. Another tore through the pack on Lilah's back, sending their precious supplies scattering across the ground, 5 yards. The first bullet hit Owen high in the left shoulder, the impact spinning him half around. The second caught him in the leg, sending him crashing to the ground just yards from the protective cover of the forest. Owen, Lilah cried, turning back toward him. Keep going, he gasped, pain radiating through his body. Get to the trees. Instead, she ran to his side, heedless of the bullets still flying around them. With desperate strength, she hauled him to his feet, taking his weight as they staggered the final distance to cover. The dense undergrowth closed around them, providing momentary shelter from both sight and gunfire. But Owen knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Blood soaked his shirt and trousers, each step sending waves of agony through his wounded leg. You should have kept running, he managed through gritted teeth as Lilah helped him deeper into the forest. And you should know by now that I'm not leaving you, she replied, her voice tight with determination and fear. Not ever. They stumbled onward, following a deer trail that wound between towering pines. Behind them, they could hear their pursuers crashing through the underbrush, following the obvious trail of broken branches and blood. "I'm slowing you down," Owen said after they'd covered perhaps half a mile. His strength was failing rapidly, blood loss and pain taking their toll. "You need to go on ahead." "Stop saying that," Lilah snapped, her arm tightening around his waist. "We stay together." Before Owen could argue further, the ground ahead of them fell away suddenly, a steep ravine dropping at least 50 feet to a rushing stream below. They had reached the edge of a bluff with no visible path forward. "We're trapped," Lilah whispered, the first hint of despair entering her voice. Owen's mind raced, evaluating their dwindling options. The sounds of pursuit were growing closer. Within minutes, they would be discovered. "Help me sit," he said, gesturing toward a fallen log near the edge of the ravine. Lilah eased him down, then tore strips from her petticoat to bind his wounds. Her hands worked quickly, efficiently, though both knew it was likely too little, too late. "Listen to me," Owen said, capturing her hands to still their movement. "There's still a chance for you to escape. Follow the ravine edge north. There might be a crossing point." She shook her head, tears forming in her eyes despite her obvious determination to remain strong. "I told you." "I know what you told me," he interrupted gently, "and I love you for it. But this isn't the time for stubbornness, Lilah. This is about survival." "Not without you," she insisted. "I won't." The sharp crack of a breaking branch silenced her. Both turned to see Harker emerging from the trees, rifle raised and pointed directly at them. The bounty hunter's weathered face split in a triumphant smile. "End of the line, Xavier," he said, stepping forward cautiously. "You've led us a merry chase, I'll give you that." Owen shifted slightly, putting his body between Harker and Lilah despite his wounded state. "The woman goes free," he stated, making it a demand rather than a request. "She's done nothing wrong." Harker laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "That's not what her brother-in-law says, claims she helped a murderer escape justice. Stole property, might even have had a hand in her husband's convenient death." "That's a lie," Lilah exclaimed, outrage momentarily overriding fear. "Maybe so," Harker shrugged. "But Thomas Morgan's paying extra to bring you back to face charges, so back you'll go, both of you." Owen's hand inched toward his pistol, still holstered at his side, if he could create even a moment's distraction. Harker noticed the movement and raised his rifle slightly. "Don't try it, Xavier. I'm authorized to bring you in dead or alive, and dead is looking mighty tempting right now." The standoff was interrupted by the arrival of the marshal and the other bounty hunters, crashing through the underbrush with considerably less stealth than Harker had managed. "You found them," the marshal observed unnecessarily, his own pistol drawn. "Good work, Harker." "Xavier's wounded," Harker replied. "Shouldn't give us much trouble now." The casual discussion of his condition, as if he were an animal brought to bay rather than a man, ignited a final, desperate determination in Owen. With Lilah pressed against his side, he could feel her trembling, not with fear, he realized, but with tightly controlled rage. "It's over, Xavier," the marshal said, stepping forward. "Surrender now, and I'll make sure you get proper medical attention before your trial." "And the woman," Owen demanded, still shielding Lilah as best he could. "Goes back to her brother-in-law to face whatever charges he sees fit to bring," the marshal replied, confirming Owen's worst fears. The injustice of it all, that Lilah should suffer for nothing more than showing kindness to a man society had already condemned, crystallized something in Owen's mind. There had to be a way out, even now. His gaze dropped briefly to the ravine edge just feet away. A desperate plan formed, one last gamble with terrible odds. "Lilah," he murmured, his lips barely moving. "When I move, roll left toward the ravine." Her slight nod was the only indication she'd heard him. Owen gathered what remained of his strength, fingers curling around the grip of his pistol. "All right, Marshal," he called, his voice stronger than he felt. "We're coming quietly." The deception worked. The marshal lowered his gun slightly, relief evident in his posture. A wise decision. In one fluid motion, born of desperation rather than skill, Owen drew his pistol and fired. Not at the men before them, but at the ground near their feet, kicking up dirt and creating momentary confusion. In the same instant, he rolled sideways, taking Lilah with him toward the edge of the ravine. Her quick understanding of his plan was the only thing that made it work. Instead of resisting, she moved with him, both of them tumbling over the edge just as gunfire erupted above them. The fall seemed both eternal and instantaneous. They hit the icy water of the stream below with bone-jarring force, the current immediately sweeping them downstream. Owen's wounds screamed in protest, but survival instinct kept him struggling toward the surface, one arm locked around Lilah's waist. They broke the surface gasping, the swift current carrying them away from their pursuers. Bullets splashed into the water around them as the men above fired blindly, but the twisting course of the stream soon carried them out of range, around a bend and into momentary safety. "The bank," Owen gasped, fighting to keep both their heads above water. "We need to get to the bank." Together they fought the current, struggling toward the closest shoreline. By the time they dragged themselves onto a narrow gravel beach, they had been carried at least half a mile downstream. Owen collapsed onto the stones, strength finally deserting him completely. His wounds had reopened in the water, blood seeping through his sodden clothes. Lilah knelt beside him, pushing wet hair from her face, her expression a mixture of determination and fear. "We need to keep moving," she urged. "They'll follow the stream." "I can't," Owen admitted, the words costing him dearly. "You go on, find help if you can, or just find safety." "Owen Xavier," Lilah said, her voice suddenly fierce, "if you think I jumped off a cliff with you just to abandon you now, you don't know me at all." The declaration would have made him smile if he'd had the strength. Instead, he simply reached for her hand, holding it weakly. "I love you," he said, the words carrying the weight of possible farewell. "Whatever happens, know that." "I know," she replied softly, "and I love you too much to let you die here." With surprising strength, she helped him to his feet once more, supporting his weight as they staggered away from the stream and into the shelter of the forest beyond. Every step was agony for Owen, but Lilah's determined presence kept him moving when his own will would have failed. They had covered perhaps a quarter mile when the sound of a wagon on a nearby trail reached them. Lilah paused, listening intently. "Wait here," she whispered, easing Owen down against a tree. "I'll see who it is." Before he could protest, she had slipped away through the underbrush. Owen fought to remain conscious, his vision blurring at the edges. The blood loss, the cold water, the exhaustion of their flight, all were taking their toll. He was on the verge of passing out when Lilah returned, accompanied by an elderly man in rough frontier clothing. "This is Mr. Jenkins," she explained quickly. "He's a trapper heading north. He's agreed to help us." The old man knelt beside Owen, his weathered face creased with concern as he examined the wounds. "Gunshot," he observed, "bad business. But not fatal if we get you tended proper." "There are men looking for us," Owen warned, his voice barely audible. "Dangerous men." Jenkins nodded, unsurprised. "Figured as much. Young lady here told me enough. I got no love for the law nor bounty hunters. Been on the wrong side of both in my time." With Jenkins's help, Lilah managed to get Owen to the waiting wagon, concealed beneath a tarp among the trapper's furs and supplies. The jolting motion as they resumed their journey sent waves of pain through his wounded body, but it was movement away from danger, and for that Owen was grateful. Consciousness faded in and out as the wagon trundled northward. Owen was aware of Lilah's hand in his, of her voice murmuring reassurances, of occasional stops to change his bandages and force water between his parched lips. Time lost meaning. Hours blended into days, marked only by the changing light filtering through the canvas above and the steady rhythm of the wagon's wheels. When Owen finally regained full consciousness, he was lying on a rough cot in what appeared to be a small cabin. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting warm light across unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, disorientation gripped him, then Lilah's face appeared above him, her eyes lighting with relief. "You're awake," she said, her hand cool against his forehead. "The fever's broken." "Where are we?" Owen's voice was a rasp, his throat dry from disuse. "Mr. Jenkins's winter cabin," Lilah explained, helping him sip water from a tin cup. "North of the territorial border, in Canada actually." The information took a moment to process. Canada, how long was I unconscious? "Nearly a week." Lilah sat beside him on the edge of the cot, shadows of exhaustion visible beneath her eyes despite her smile. Your wounds became infected. There were times I wasn't sure. She trailed off, but the fear she'd experienced was evident in her expression. But you saved me, Owen said softly, again. We saved each other, she corrected, and Mr. Jenkins saved us both. He's gone to his traplines for a few days, but he says we're welcome to stay until you're strong enough to travel. And then what? Owen asked the question that hung between them. Lilah's smile turned thoughtful. Then we start over. Mr. Jenkins says there's a small settlement about 50 miles north, the kind of place that doesn't ask too many questions about a couple's past. A couple, Owen repeated, the word carrying weight and possibility. If that's still what you want, Lilah said, a hint of uncertainty entering her voice for the first time. After everything that's happened, I would understand if. Owen reached for her hand, cutting off the doubt before it could take root. It's all I want, he assured her. You want a chance at a new beginning. The relief in her eyes mirrored his own. Against impossible odds, they had escaped not just their pursuers but the constraints of their former lives, Lilah's as a widow bound by society's expectations, Owen's as a man falsely accused and hunted. We'll need new names, Lilah mused, practical as always even in this moment of reunion. New identities to match our new beginning. Mrs. Jenkins suggested Sarah and Thomas Brown, she continued. Simple names that won't draw attention. He's already told people in the settlement that his niece and her husband will be joining him soon. The thoughtfulness of the old trapper's preparations touched Owen deeply. Seems we owe Mr. Jenkins more than we can repay. He says helping us is payment enough for old sins of his own, Lilah explained, though I've promised to help with his correspondence. Apparently, he has business interests he's managed to hide from various authorities for decades. The image of Lilah, refined, educated Lilah, helping an old mountain man with his clandestine business letters brought a smile to Owen's face despite his weakened condition. So we become Sarah and Thomas Brown, he said, testing the names, settlers looking for a fresh start in the Canadian wilderness. It's not the life either of us imagined, Lilah acknowledged, but it's a life we can build together. Free from the past. The simple truth of her words settled over them like a blessing. Whatever hardships lay ahead, and there would surely be many in this remote frontier, they would face them as partners, bound by choice rather than convention. There's one thing I want to do first, Owen said, struggling to sit up despite his weakness, before we become the Browns officially. Lilah supported him, concern evident in her expression. You should rest. This can't wait, he insisted gently, not anymore. With effort he reached for her left hand where his mother's silver ring still rested, the symbol of their deception that had become something far more meaningful. Lilah Morgan, he said, his voice gaining strength with each word, will you marry me? Not as part of a ruse or a strategy, but because I love you and want to spend whatever life we build together as your husband in truth as well as name. Tears welled in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. The kiss they shared sealed a promise begun in pretense but completed in the deepest truth, that whatever names they used, whatever place they called home, their hearts had recognized in each other something rare and precious. A love strong enough to survive the harshest frontier. Spring 1872, Northern TRRI2RIS. The small cabin stood in a clearing beside a swift-flowing creek, morning light glinting off its newly constructed windows. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, carrying the scent of baking bread into the clear mountain air. Inside, Thomas Brown, once known as Owen Xavier, put the finishing touches on a rocking chair crafted from carefully selected maple. His wounds had long since healed, leaving only scars as reminders of their desperate flight months earlier. The sound of singing drifted through the open door as Sarah Brown, formerly Lilah Morgan, returned from gathering early spring greens, her basket full and a contented smile on her face. The harsh winter had tested them both, but spring had arrived at last, bringing new growth and renewed hope. It's perfect, she declared, running her hand along the smooth arm of the rocker. Just in time, too. Her other hand rested on the gentle swell of her stomach, where their child grew, a new life that would know nothing of bounty hunters or false accusations, only the love of parents who had risked everything to build this peaceful existence. "Just like we promised," Owen said, rising to place his hand over hers, "a home of our own." The small settlement a few miles distant had welcomed the young couple without question, accepting Mr. Jenkins's introduction at face value. Owen's skill with woodworking had quickly earned him a reputation as a craftsman, while Lilah's education made her valuable as the community's unofficial letter writer and occasional teacher. It wasn't the life either had envisioned when fate brought them together on that dusty Montana ranch. It was something better, a life chosen deliberately, built on honesty between them if not with the world. "Any regrets?" Owen asked, drawing her into his arms. Lilah looked around their modest home, at the furniture Owen had crafted with his own hands, the curtains she had sewn, the books they read together during the long winter nights, the silver ring that now had a proper gold band beside it. "Not one," she replied with absolute certainty. "This is where we were always meant to be." As they stood together in the home they had created, the future stretching before them filled with possibility rather than fear, both knew the truth of her words. Their journey had begun with a simple act of kindness, a stranger offering help to a lonely widow, but had transformed into something neither could have imagined. A love that had survived pursuit and gunfire, deception and revelation. A love forged in the dust of the frontier and tempered by adversity until it emerged stronger than any force that had tried to destroy it. Their names might be different now, their location remote, but the essence of who they were together remained unchanged. Two people who had recognized in each other not just passion or convenience, but the rare gift of a true partnership. And as the spring sun climbed higher over their mountain home, its warm light seemed to bless this new beginning, this life they had fought so hard to claim as their own.